Good morning to you. And so the verdict was out. What happened yesterday afternoon was decisive, brutal, and in retrospect, perhaps inevitable. Many people up and down the country will be sad about the outcome. Enough, however, about the Welsh in Amsterdam. In politics, it was also a night of drama. But where does the sudden departure of Matt Hancock leave the Prime Minister and, for that matter, the National Health Service? Rarely has an own goal made quite so many front pages. Well, I'm joined this morning by Jeremy Hunt, the former Health Secretary, by Brandon Lewis, the current Northern Ireland Secretary, and by Sadiq Khan, the London Mayor. I'll also be speaking to Professor and now Sir Peter Horby, Chair of Nervtag and one of the government's most important scientific advisors. So lots of questions there. To look more generally at this morning's news, Jane Moore of The Sun, Newsnight's political editor Nick Watt, and Salma Shah, who worked as a special advisor to the new Health Secretary, Sajid Javid. We begin with the news headlines from Nina Warhurst.
Andrew, good morning. The former Chancellor of the Exchequer, Sajid Javid, has said he's honoured to have been asked to be Health Secretary after Matt Hancock resigned from the job. Mr Hancock stepped down last night, saying he'd let the public down after pictures and video emerged of him breaching social distancing guidance when he kissed a co-worker in his office. He had the support of the Prime Minister, but faced growing pressure from his own Conservative colleagues to quit. Half of all under 30 adults in England will have received a first dose of coronavirus vaccine by the end of today. More than 4.2 million people aged between 18 and 29 will have had the jab. The Vaccines Minister Nadhim Zahawi called this a phenomenal achievement. Dozens of pages of classified government documents have been found strewn across a Kent street by a member of the public. The Ministry of Defence papers discussed the likely Russian reaction to a British warship's passage through Ukrainian waters off the coast of Crimea last Wednesday. Another document outlines proposals for Britain's military presence in Afghanistan. Safety checks have been ordered on all buildings of a similar age to an apartment building in Miami which collapsed on Thursday, killing at least 5 people. It's emerged there'd been warnings 3 years ago about the building's structural safety, and rescuers in Florida searching for survivors say their efforts are being hampered by fires which have broken out in the rubble. More than 150 people are still missing. And as Andrew was saying, Wales are out of the Euros following a heavy 4-0 defeat to Denmark in the opening game of the knockout phase. Rob Page's side began well, but were unable to compete with a vibrant Danish team who scored 3 second-half goals. Wales finished with 10 men after a red card for Harry Wilson, and there was no immediate news of the future of captain Gareth Bale. That's it from me. The next news on BBC One is at 1 o'clock. Back to you, Andrew.
Nina, many thanks, and a warm thank you, first of all, to Nick Robinson for standing in for me last week. I had a bit of COVID last week, despite being double jabbed, and very nasty it was too. On that note, to the headlines and the front pages as ever, this was, of course, a Sun story. So let's start with the Sun on Sunday. Matt finished, it said. And the pun masters on the Mirror have come up with exactly the same thought. Matt finished. He appears on every single front page, no surprise to him, I'm sure. Hancock quits his job and his marriage, the Mail on Sunday taking the personal angle on that. The Observer, gone. Hancock quits after day of humiliation. And that word humiliation is all over the front page of the Sunday Times as well. Humiliated Hancock quits. It's also got a very, very interesting story about his use of a private email account, which I'm sure we'll be talking about in great length in a moment. And finally, the Sunday Telegraph again. Hancock quits, and they quote his statement, "Those of us who make these rules have got to stick by them." And that's therefore, he said, I had to resign. To review the newspapers, Nick Watt of Newsnight, Jane Moore of The Sun, and Salma Shah, who used to work indeed for the new Secretary of State for Health. We'll be talking to all of those first of all. But Nick, let's just go back over the last 12 hours. It's only 12 hours or so. And 12 hours or so ago, Number 10 was still sticking by the line, the matter is closed, it's finished, that's it. What went wrong?
Well, you did wonder just how long Matt Hancock was going to be able to defy political gravity. There was an excruciating lobby briefing on Friday when that line, "the matter is closed," was repeated ad infinitum. In his favour to stay is he had a Prime Minister who couldn't sack him, because as we know, Boris Johnson is hardly a monk, and a Prime Minister who wouldn't sack him because he hates the idea of the mob. I know what he regards as the mob. I know ministers, former ministers, who've gone to the Prime Minister to say, I have a difficulty, I need to resign, and he says, no, you're not, please stay. And some of these ministers have had eventually to resign. But the problem for Matt Hancock was this fundamental point, is you cannot say one thing and do another. Tory MPs talking about the vehemence with which he condemned people who broke COVID rules. Another senior Tory MP saying, we have, not literally, but we've been sitting there with our arms folded after the last 48 hours. And it was that silence from colleagues that really was his undoing.
Jane Moore, this is, of course, a very, very important media and political story. But what about Sun readers themselves, the readers who've been absorbing all of this? What's your sense of what the country, as it were, or that part of the country is thinking?
Well, I mean, the electorate as a whole, to be honest, I think if you look at the situation, you know, you can, if you place yourself in that office with Boris Johnson and Matt Hancock, you know, you could guess that maybe they thought they could weather the storm because, as Nick said, you know, Boris does not have a particularly monk-like existence himself, or hasn't done in the past, but still got voted as Prime Minister. So actually the public are prepared to take that sort of thing on board. But what they won't take on board is hypocrisy. And I think that, you know, when you, as Health Secretary, have sort of inserted yourself into the personal life of the electorate and tell them how to behave, you have to follow that rule yourself, or some might say.
Yeah. Can I ask about the politics of this a little bit more, Jane, because you've chosen quite an interesting story from The Observer this morning, which is about the so-called COVID recovery group of Conservative MPs who are particularly hostile to restrictions. And it does seem, we've been picking this up as well, that they were lobbying Number 10 very, very hard against Matt Hancock, who's, of course, one of the big voices for caution.
Yeah, 100%. And also there's this thing on page 4 of The Observer. Rules don't matter to him. That's a quote. The day that support of Tory loyalists ran out. So on Friday night, he had a Zoom meeting, a scheduled Zoom meeting with 70 activists in his own constituency. And they were prevented from asking him questions about this, you know. And when I think a minister becomes the story, you know, the Eastern Daily Press, a newspaper in his own constituency, the headline was "A complete and utter hypocrite." I mean, there's no grey areas there. That was the mood. I think when a minister has memes circulating social media, I mean, everybody was getting memes. He's just a subject of ridicule now. He had to go.
And so, as night follows day, we have a new Secretary of State for Health, Sajid Javid. Salma, you worked for him from a long time. Straightforward question. What kind of Secretary of State for Health do you think he's going to be?
Well, interestingly, just to go back to your point on the COVID recovery group and their lobbying, I think the immediate thing you're going to see is a change in complexion around the cabinet table. And I don't imagine that actually his caution will be diminished when it comes to the pandemic, but I certainly think his view could be defined as a lot more liberal when it comes to COVID restrictions. So I think immediately we'll see that.
That's really interesting, a change in the power balance in cabinet.
Yes, I think we will see a nuanced shift, but a shift in the opposite direction from where certainly Matt Hancock was. I also think that, I mean, you know, we have to wait to see what he's going to be like. Nobody knows when you go into cabinet what you're going to be like in these roles. But I think what's interesting is that he is details focused and he's a problem solver, which will stand him in good stead for some of the issues that are going to come up, particularly around the backlogs and how we're going to fix appointments in the NHS. So I think from that perspective, he is in a strong position. And having dealt with a lot of crises previously in government and had so many departments, I mean, lots of people on social media comparing him to Ken Clarke from days gone by.
Now, we know that he's a details man and all the rest of it. We also know that he's a man with plenty of enemies of his own who exited cabinet as Chancellor of the Exchequer rather fast. And there's been an extraordinary tweet, I'm sure you've seen it, from one Dominic Cummings, no great Sajid Javid fan. And he says, so Carrie, that's the Prime Minister's wife, appoints Saj. NB, if I hadn't tricked the Prime Minister into firing Saj, we'd have had a Treasury with useless Secretary of State and SPADs, no furlough scheme, total chaos instead of joint 10-11 team, which was a big success. Saj equals bog standard, equals chasing headlines and failing, equals awful for NHS, need regime change. He is going to be the victim of a fair number of grenades, verbal grenades, I trust, thrown by Dominic Cummings over the next few weeks, isn't he?
Yeah, certainly. And Dominic Cummings is entitled to his opinion. But I think what's obvious is that the Prime Minister certainly thinks that Sajid is to be trusted and to be brought back in. I don't think there was any doubt in anyone's mind that, Sajid and Dominic didn't get on and they sort of have different worldviews on things. But the fact of the matter is, Cummings no longer does anything in government. So this is just that, an opinion.
Yes, and I mentioned Carrie Symonds there, Carrie Johnson now, Jane Moore. We do tend to talk about this government sometimes as if the whole thing is a kind of off-cut episode of the Tudors and it's kind of court politics. But how important do you think, seriously, Carrie's friendship with Sajid is in bringing him back in again? He had an inner voice inside Number 10 all along, didn't he?
Yeah, I mean, if I was a betting woman, which I'm not, I would have thought that Jeremy Hunt or maybe Nadim Sahawi would have been in the running for the job. It does strike me as an odd appointment for the simple reason that there has been all of this narrative about, Carrie Antoinette, the puppeteer behind Boris Johnson. So to appoint somebody that she was a former aide to, who went to her 30th birthday party, who is very chummy with her, sort of feeds into that narrative. It doesn't necessarily, mean that it's right or that it's true, but it does sort of, the optics of it are a bit strange.
It keeps us all reading at the very, very least. Nick Watt, I was really interested in what Selma was saying about the balance of power changing inside the cabinet. How important do you think it is that we've got, first of all, a new member of the cabinet who was himself Chancellor of the Exchequer and quite tight on the purse strings? That was why Dominic Cummings fell out with him originally. And therefore, as it were, we've got the Chancellor and a new ally of the Chancellor sitting a couple of seats along. And secondly, we've got somebody who is no longer going to be a voice for caution on restrictions.
Well, yes, I was talking earlier about how Conservative MPs, the reason why they lost patience with Matt Hancock was the vehemence with which he enforced those COVID rules. And yes, Sajid Javid is very different, but it is important to say that he's going to be Health Secretary. He's not going to be Chancellor. He is going to be responsible for the health service. And if the government scientists come to you and say, this wave is now so serious that the NHS is potentially in trouble, he will be Health Secretary and he'll have to sort of carry out those duties. Hopefully the vaccines will do the job and they won't be in that place. Interestingly, on Rishi Sunak, speaking to his aides in recent weeks, he's really concerned that people think that he didn't care about the health of the nation.
That's really interesting. Now, there's one other aspect, or two other aspects of this story that are really interesting. One is where the story came from originally, and the Mail on Sunday has a really interesting double-page spread there about the camera and about the person who they think leaked the story in the first place.
Yes, so this scoop by Glenn Owen in the Mail on Sunday, if you look very carefully there you are, there is a camera in Matt Hancock's office. A lot of ministers saying, I had no idea there was CCTV footage. Well, it turns out there is. And then the other important line is it was an anti-lockdown whistleblower who had spotted what was going on. They've got Instagram messages from this person saying, I've seen this footage. It shows the Secretary of State in a difficult position, and can we get it out there? And this person was saying that on June the 17th, which is obviously a month after this supposedly took place.
So, Jane, I imagine that all across Whitehall, ministers will now be wondering how much of what they're doing and saying is being recorded and observed and could be passed to the Sun newspaper or indeed the Chinese government or anybody else.
Well, I think all of us in life now just have to live our lives on the basis that everything that we do is being, recorded on CCTV somewhere. I mean, if you look at the as you mentioned, the Mail on Sunday spread, the camera there, that was there in place in 2017 on the ceiling is like a camera that we all have in every office. You'll have it at the BBC. We have it when we go shopping. They're pretty routine cameras. So if it is still there, it strikes me as very reckless that they didn't sort of realise that they were being filmed. But yeah, I mean, I do wonder, a whistleblower within the department has obviously eventually given, I think they sat on the footage for 6 weeks. I wonder whether again, supposition, but I wonder whether they were wondering what to do with it. And then when lockdown got extended and they're listening to Matt Hancock telling us all still to be careful about hugging granny, can't have,
they snapped.
Funeral attendance, maybe that was the trigger to go, actually, hang on, this is a hypocrisy too far.
Very, very interesting. Salma, one other story that I must ask you about. On the front page of the Sunday Times, that Matt Hancock was using a personal email over which the rest of government had no insight or access to do government business. How much of a breach of the regulations and normal ways of doing things is that? And how worried would other ministers be about that?
I think it sort of depends on how frequently it was used. If it was just because somebody happened to contact him on that email and he forwarded it, then I don't think that is a huge issue. It's just a sort of administrative problem because, not everything will go to a minister's email account. Not everybody will have that email address for a start. I do think generally ministers just use their work emails because that is where the traffic happens for submissions and other things. So it shouldn't be a huge cause for concern. What I do think, just to go back to the last point that we were talking about, what I do think is concerning, that even though a whistleblower perfectly legitimately wanted to expose hypocrisy, I think it is odd that the minister didn't know that there was a CCTV camera in his office, and the idea that actually we're in an environment where anything can be taken and used. And I do think the Whitehall needs to look at what this issue is and whether there was a different way to raise some of these grievances rather than exposing security.
I'm sure you're right. Salma, Jane and Nick, thanks all very much. 3 really well-informed people, and so to the weather. I was glad that I was locked down with coronavirus last week. In one way, it was pretty unappetising weather out there anyway. Now that I'm able to amble outside again, is it going to be a better week ahead? Over to Matt Taylor at the Weather Centre. Matt.
It is for some, Andrew. Good morning. Not for others, but it's to the north and west of the country where you're going to see skies like this at times through the week ahead. Further south, we've had showers and downpours already. Still continue across the southwest of England. The V's further east, but they're starting to develop once again, and more to come through the day. Some of those could become heavy and thundery. Southernmost counties of England, far south of Wales, maybe into South Midlands, East Anglia at times too, 1 or 2 showers. Away from that, most of you having a dry Sunday. Cloud amounts are varying from one place to the next. Back to the sunshine is in the west. Temperatures on the side of where they should be for the time of year, 21, 22 with that sunshine, increasingly humid towards the south and the east, where we'll see further downpours into this evening and overnight, rumble of thunder, some gusty winds too, pushing northwards into East Anglia, the Midlands, wettest conditions around the Bristol Channel. But to the north and west of the country, it will be a dry night, partly clear skies. Temperatures down into single figures for a few, a humid night towards the south-east corner. And as we go into Monday, wettest to begin with through the Midlands, Wales, the southwest, turning drier here through the day, brightening up a little bit too. Best of the brightness, Scotland, Northern Ireland and the far north of England. But as sunshine comes out in the south, we could see yet further heavy and thundery showers. Temperatures again into the low 20s for 1 or 2. They'll climb a bit further across northern areas through this week, but further south you are, more showers at times, and of course, it had to be the start of Wimbledon. Back to you, Andrew.
Of course it did. A bit of this and that, a classic English summer in Wimbledon. Now, the number of cases of coronavirus is rising in London, but the capital has by far the lowest vaccination rate in the whole of the UK. The Labour Mayor, Sadiq Khan, is with me now. Welcome, Mr. Khan. First of all, the blindingly obvious question, if you don't mind, did Matt Hancock do the right thing?
He did, but what's surprising is on Friday, the Prime Minister thought this matter was closed because Matt Hancock gave an apology. And even yesterday, it wasn't the Prime Minister sacking Matt Hancock, it was a resignation from Matt Hancock because of the media coverage. I think what's important now is for there to be proper investigations into which rules were broken in relation to use of private email, in relation to the appointment of senior staff, and also in relation to the social distancing rules. I'm keen, though, to work closely with the new Health Secretary to make sure as many Londoners as possible are fully jabbed up so we can properly reopen on July the 19th.
And another bus driver's son.
It's always good to see this small club of children of bus drivers doing really well, and I wish him all the best.
OK, let's talk about COVID in London. It's spreading quite fast. I've been a victim, though. I think I got mine at the G7 in Cornwall, but nonetheless, it is everywhere around London, and yet around 40% of Londoners are not vaccinated. Do you take responsibility for that?
I do, but let's start with the good news, which is as a global city, we're doing far better than other global cities. The first jab was only administered 200 days ago, and we now have more than 8.5 million Londoners having had at least one dose and 3.5 million having both doses. And the reason why it's important, Andrew, is although the case numbers are going up, those in hospital have now stabilised and in fact are far lower than either wave 1 or wave 2. And if you receive both jabs, you're more than 90% less likely to have to go in hospital, which wasn't the case in the first wave or second wave.
And yet, if you look at London inside the UK, London is between 14 and 17% worse than the next worst region. In other words, London is holding the whole country back at the moment. Why is London such a problem in terms of vaccination?
Well, actually, we're not that far behind. We're about 8% behind. But the reason why we've got challenges in London as a global city is our population is younger, it's more mobile, it's more diverse. We're less likely to be registered with a GP, which means the normal official channels of communication, the texting to your patient, the ringing up your patient aren't there. But also we have a large migrant population as well, less likely to be registered with a GP, but also less likely to share their data to receive a jab. The good news, though, is last weekend we had more than 135,000 Londoners receiving the jab with our mass vaccination centres, Chelsea, Spurs, West Ham, Charlton. This weekend, Arsenal, Crystal Palace and Charlton doing really good work.
Fronted by Jeremy Corbyn, I noticed.
Well, the key thing is to make sure all of us do whatever we can to encourage Londoners to be fully protected, to have one, if not both jabs before July the 19th.
Despite this relative lack of protection among Londoners, you thought it would be safe to reopen on June the 21st. Do you think, therefore, that we should end all restrictions, the government should end all restrictions in London for July the 5th?
I think the reality is we're not going to be able to fully reopen on July the 5th. I think we should, hopefully, fingers crossed, be able to fully reopen on July the 19th. The key thing, though, is for as many of us as possible to receive the jab. Why? Because it protects you against the worst consequences of the virus, but also you're less likely to be in hospital, and we're more likely to fully reopen on July the 19th. It's crucial.
There are some really hard decisions for London to take. Wembley is due to open fully, that is with 90,000 people inside it in a relatively short time for the finals of the Euros. Given where we are, given how fast the Delta variant is spreading, is that really wise?
I think the current agreement is for Wembley to open at two-thirds capacity, around 67,000. And what the government, working closely with UEFA, the FA, Brent Council, Public Health England, the NHS is doing is making sure the environment is safe with lateral flow tests. You've got to have two jabs.
As Mayor of London, do you think it is wise for Wembley to host the UEFA finals?
Yeah, I'm reassured. I think it's going to be great for our city. The entire world's going to be watching London for the finals and the semi-finals. We've worked incredibly hard to make the game safe, and I think we should be proud of that.
What about theatres? There's been a great controversy over opening theatres. Do you think they should open now?
Listen, theatres work so hard to make themselves COVID secure. I was at a theatre 2 Sundays ago. I think they should fully reopen on July the 19th, as well as live music venues, as well as pubs, as well as bars. I think the two things that are crucial over the next period is, one, to make sure everyone gets the vaccine, but also, secondly, that we make sure we have a rapid recovery.
But we know that means there will be a huge increase in infections across London at that period.
Well, no,
and you think because of the vaccine it's still OK?
Well, one of the reasons why the Prime Minister took the advice from his experts to delay by 4 weeks us fully reopening on June the 21st was to allow more of us to receive 1, if not 2, doses of the vaccine. This gives us time to make sure as many of us as possible are fully protected. That's why it's so important, whether you live in London or elsewhere in the country, please make sure you get one jab and hopefully both jabs before July the 19th. Let's
turn to the really big issue for most Londoners at the moment, which is violent crime. And I'm going to hover over these numbers because they are pretty awful, really. Since 2015, murders are up 17%. Crimes involving a blade are up 10%, robberies are up 5%, and offences of rape are up 13%. Straightforward question, why is London becoming more dangerous under Sadiq Khan?
Well, serious youth violence in our city started going up in 2013. with youth violence in 2014. But these are people we're talking about, and these are victims, and I meet regularly the bereaved families. So we're working incredibly hard to both invest in the police, being tough on crime, but also, as importantly, invest in giving young people constructive things to do. And here's the good news.
But something is going wrong here, isn't it?
Well, here's the good news. Before the pandemic even begun, we saw youth violence going down, homicides going down, knife crime injuries below the age of 25 going down, burglaries going down, but I'm not complacent. And that's why it's so important to continue investing in both the police, but also young people as well.
I'm still not understanding why things have gone wrong, because I read you those numbers and they're pretty horrific.
Well, let me explain.
So why are they going wrong?
All right, well, let me explain. The reason why serious youth violence began again in 2013, 3 years before I became mayor of the city, was because cuts have consequences. You can't, reduce police officer numbers by 21,000, close down youth clubs, reduce public services, reduce the numbers of after-school clubs, have very few things for young people to do, and then be surprised when crime starts going up. But here's the good news.
Well, you've got 800 new police officers since 2016. Yes, 800.
Well, no, we've got 1,300 additional officers funded by City Hall, thanks to council tax and business rates. But
even better. Well, here's the question.
We lost thousands before I invested in the police service. But
here's the question. Boris Johnson had fewer police officers, and yet his record as mayor on crime was better than yours.
Not true. So Boris Johnson, when he became mayor in 2008, there was a Labour government investing record sums in both being tough on crime and tough on the causes. And up until 2013, after the Olympics, he had far more officers than before. There's a link between officer numbers starting to go down in 2013 and serious youth violence going up. But look, I'm clear this is a serious issue. I'm also clear that it's really heartbreaking meeting bereaved families. And that's why it's so important that we are both tough on crime with more policing, and it's really good the government's done a U-turn and it's given us more police officers, but also tough on the causes, investing in young people.
Well, let's go back to the numbers and then to, as it were, an appeal directly to you. So under Boris Johnson, there were 741,000 crimes in his final year of office, and it's now 913,000 in 2019-20, last figures we've got. Jasna Badzak, whose son Sven was killed on a shopping errand earlier this year, says, knife crime has infected every part of London. He, that's you, is mayor in charge of policing. He can't blame the Home Office or Downing Street.
Well, I accept responsibility. I'm the mayor of London. The point I'm making is we've got to work together. The government's got to give us the resources and powers we need, but also we've got to invest in young people as well. And we are making progress in relation to, you want to talk about numbers, in relation to the numbers of people who are victims of crime going down, but it's not good enough because one fatality in London, one victim of knife crime in London is one too many.
Do you need a change in policy?
I think we need more resources. So the good news is this summer we'll have record activity for young people to do in education, culture and sport, but also high-profile policing. We need to make sure, though, we'll get the additional officers we've been promised by the government.
Do you think that Cressida Dick is responsible for rising crime in London?
No, those committing the crimes, an act of violence, are responsible for the violent crime. We've got to invest in policing, but also invest in young people as well.
Now, Cressida Dick has faced very, very serious criticism for the Met's handling of the Sarah Everard vigil, which we all remember. And the Met's recently been accused of, quotes, institutional corruption, quotes, over the case of Daniel Morgan. Do you have faith in Cressida Dick, or should she resign?
No, I've got faith in Cressida Dick. I've got full confidence in Cressida Dick. Both the Home Secretary and I take our responsibilities to scrutinise the police very seriously, and the Commissioner will be providing an explanation into the very serious findings of the Daniel Morgan panel, but also we're making sure that we address the issues that concern Londoners, violence, crime.
Well, here's where we are now, and you've talked about victims. Daniel Morgan's son says he doesn't accept the Met's apology and he doesn't think the culture of the Met can change unless Cressida Dick leaves. Is he wrong?
Well, look, my commiserations to Daniel Morgan's son and the entire family. I think the key thing is to make sure the police, Cressida Dick is the Commissioner of the Met Police Service, the government, myself, work together to earn back the trust confidence lost by Daniel Morgan's family and others because of the issues that you've mentioned.
Sadiq Khan, thanks very much indeed for coming into us this Sunday morning. Now, Professor Sir Peter Horby is one of the government's most important coronavirus advisors. He's chair of Nervtag, the new and emerging respiratory viral threats group. He is also about to set up a new centre focused on preventing future pandemics at Oxford University. And in whatever time he's got left, he runs the world's biggest coronavirus clinical trial monitoring thousands of patients. I spoke to him this morning and I asked him if he has now seen enough data to definitively definitively say the vaccine has broken the link between the virus and serious illness and death?
They've certainly weakened the link. We're seeing, quite a different situation now. We're definitely seeing increasing infection rates, but what we're seeing is a much lower level of hospitalisation. So that link is really much weaker, which is really fantastic. But it's not completely broken. As we see increasing infections, we will see increasing hospitalisations. But at this stage, we're able to sort of make sure that the health system isn't overwhelmed, and vaccination is really key to that.
So July the 19th is the date when the government are going to remove all remaining legal restrictions, and for many people that day can't come soon enough. But as a scientific advisor, are you happy with that date for the end of all legal restrictions?
19th of July as the earliest is what's actually been said, and we always have to be driven by the data, not the dates. So we're watching it very carefully, and there will be a lot of analysis of the data coming up to that date to make sure we're comfortable with that release. At the moment, the data is encouraging that we can do that, but we have to make sure that we follow the data.
So it sounds to me as if you would not be comfortable or think it wise to move the date earlier to, say, July the 5th, which has also been talked about.
No, I wouldn't do that. I think it was a very sensible move to put it back by 4 weeks. And I don't think we should rush into anything. We really want to make sure that we can release all restrictions and not have to backtrack at all.
Given what you know about how these viruses spread and the dominant strains, is it inevitable that the Delta variant is going to spread across the continent of Europe?
I think it is, yes. We saw that with the Alpha variant, the Kent variant. The modelling that we did in the UK is actually very good, and we predicted that it was going to be very transmissible. And that it would spread very widely, and that's what happened. And that same, modelling for the Delta variant would suggest that that's a more transmissible strain that would be very difficult to control. And so I think we will see it spreading in Europe, unfortunately.
Is the reason that the Delta variant spread so fast here, do you think, because we didn't have strong enough border controls earlier in the summer?
Well, it's clear that the Delta variant started to transmit within the UK because of introductions from other countries. So, I think there is a case to be said that did happen, and stronger border measures may have delayed that, may even have prevented it. But there is an obvious trade-off that policymakers and politicians have to make between, absolute complete restrictions and stopping, various viruses coming in.
I hope it's not self-indulgent, Sir Peter, to ask you about me, because I got coronavirus last week. I'd been double jabbed earlier in the spring and felt, if not king of the world, at least almost entirely immune, and yet I got it. Was I just unlucky?
Were you unlucky? I think you were. I mean, what we know with the vaccines is that they are actually remarkably effective at preventing hospitalizations and deaths. They are less effective at preventing infection. So, although you were sick, you weren't hospitalized, and, there wasn't any fatality. And that's probably because of the vaccination. I think it's really important for people to realize that as we increase the vaccination rates and most older people are vaccinated, we will see breakthrough infections, and we'll start to see that actually, in the end, the majority of infections are in people who've been vaccinated. And that does not mean that the vaccines don't work. Breakthroughs are expected. What we want to do is to prevent hospitalizations and deaths, and the vaccines do that very effectively.
Sure, I'm pretty clear that by being vaccinated, I did not end up in hospital, and that's a great thing. But we use slightly glibly occasionally this phrase, mild and moderate infections. For me, it was really quite unpleasant. And I just wonder if it's important in terms of public health messaging to explain to people, you may be double vaccinated, but that doesn't mean you won't catch COVID-19 and it won't be pretty bloody.
I think you're absolutely right. You can be pretty sick and not end up in hospital. And actually, many of my colleagues and friends have been in that situation. I'm in my 50s, and many of my friends of a similar age have had pretty severe illness and have been close to sort of trying to admit themselves to hospital. So you can get quite a nasty disease.
My early symptoms were simply like a summer cold, and I had no idea for a while that I had COVID-19 at all. I'm wondering whether the symptoms listed on the NHS website at the moment are out of date.
Well, it is being looked at. We monitor, there's various systems in the UK to monitoring the symptom clusters that we're seeing in people who are testing positive for COVID-19, and we update the symptom list. At the moment, there is some suggestion that the symptom profile might be slightly different, but not any evidence that's strong enough yet to change the case definitions and the recommendations.
How much do we know about antibody resistance carrying on after vaccination? Because I was vaccinated quite early in the process, and I'm just wondering again, was that maybe one of the reasons that I caught COVID, that the antibody resistance had declined over time?
Well, it will decline over time. Currently, data is accumulating because we haven't had the vaccines for that long, actually. But it is suggesting from both natural infection and from vaccination that it's sustained, for probably 8 months to a year at least. But there will be gradual declines. So the key question is if and when we need to introduce booster vaccination, so giving someone an extra dose to reboost their response.
Let me ask you to try and look in a crystal ball and talk us through the route out of this pandemic. Do you think it's going to be relatively smooth and easy from now on?
Smooth and easy is not the words I would choose for the route out of the pandemic. It's going to be a bumpy tale, so to speak. We've seen that it's a very labile situation still. We've seen Sydney reintroduce lockdown measures. We've seen Israel reintroduce masks. We've seen the Alpha variant, and now we've seen the Delta variant, and how many letters there are in the alphabet. We will see many more. So we have to expect that it will be a bumpy road out, and that there will be twists and turns that we're not wishing to see.
And do you think that by winter we may see yet another variant, an epsilon or a gamma variant appearing by then?
Well, there's lots of variants appearing. Whether they take off like the Alpha and the Delta have, it remains to be seen. One of the questions is how far can this virus change? It's what we call the envelope of plasticity of the virus. Can it really keep on changing forever, or will it sort of settle down? It probably will settle down, I think.
And again, I'm asking you to guess the near future, but we've got a new health secretary this morning. The NHS faces very, very large backlogs in all sorts of areas. What do you think the biggest challenge of the winter is going to be for the NHS? A new variant, or possibly the old-fashioned flu season?
I think it's going to be a combined stress on the health system, a double whammy, perhaps even a triple whammy, because we haven't seen flu or respiratory syncytial virus last winter. So there will be increased susceptibility in the population. So there's a very real risk this winter of, COVID plus flu plus RSV, respiratory syncytial virus, which could put a lot of pressure on the NHS. So I would also, urge anyone who's offered an influenza vaccine, please do take it, because that will also help with keeping the pressures off the NHS and keeping everyone safe. You
have your new centre to prevent future pandemics or damp them down. Sajid Javid is sitting at home, stirring his coffee and wondering what is the thing that he needs to think about most in order to ensure that does not happen.
We have to work with partners across the entire globe, because we don't know where and when the next potential pandemic virus will emerge, but undoubtedly it will. And we've seen the enormous socio-economic, impact of this pandemic. And so it's really worthwhile investing very intensively for the next 20, 30 years to make sure that we really don't have to experience this again.
Sir Peter, thanks very much indeed for talking to us this morning.
Thank you, Andrew.
And with me in the studio now is the Northern Ireland Secretary, Brandon Lewis. Brandon Lewis, did Matt Hancock go because he felt he had done something terribly wrong, or because of the pressure on him?
Look, I think he outlined in his letter, he felt it was the right thing to do, that he felt he was distracting from the focus where it should be, which is on dealing with COVID. He accepted he'd done the wrong thing. What he did was wrong. That's why he apologised. And I think, as I say, obviously with reflection, as he said in his letter, he took the view that he wanted the focus rightly to be on dealing with COVID, and his position was distracting from that.
Did he feel he'd broken the law?
No, I think, as he said, his view is he broke the guidelines, and he was apologetic for that. He accepted that. And I think he's done the right thing in the sense of allowing the country to get back to focusing on the key issues.
I suppose the dilemma then is why he didn't go immediately. If he realised he had done something fundamentally wrong, why did he not go on Friday? And why did the Prime Minister back him for another 24 hours, saying the case was closed?
Well, as I say, I think it's really down to the fact both Matt and particularly the Prime Minister, I think, are focused on dealing with the pandemic. I think most people, and I have to say the communications I've had from constituents over the last few weeks, months, and even in the last couple of days, is they want the government focused on dealing with the pandemic. Matt obviously has a huge experience of dealing with that over the last year and a half. I think this is important, Andrew, just to say.
Sorry,
I think that's where the Prime Minister wanted to focus.
Whether you think the Prime Minister got it wrong by backing him.
Look, I think the Prime Minister was absolutely right. Not just
to
as
back him.
Yeah, absolutely. Because what the Prime Minister wanted was to have the Secretary of State, who has got all of that experience and knowledge, working with a phenomenal team at the Department of Health, who have delivered on this vaccine rollout, understand how the pandemic has been working, know what they're looking at for the next stages. But I also think, Matt, I think it's entirely complementary that Matt, to that,
so
Matt can take a view.
The Prime Minister wanted to keep him. Did your constituents think Matt Hancock had been a hypocrite?
Well, look, there's no doubt people have been angry and frustrated, my constituents as well, about having somebody, government ministers, saying that we've got to follow rules and guidelines and then breaking it. That's why Matt rightly apologised. He did do wrong. But Matt has also accepted that we need to be able to focus on the core issue, and that's why he's resigned.
Isn't the truth? The Prime Minister wanted to keep him, Matt Hancock wanted to stay, but in the end they gave in to what one of your colleagues described to me as mob rule.
No, I think what Matt's done is actually, as I say, taken the view that his position is distracting from the wider work. As he said in his letter, he wants to also... He's also got his children to think about.
This just doesn't make sense. If he thought he'd done the wrong thing, then he would have resigned straight away. But he tried to hang on. The Prime Minister tried to keep him, hang on to him, until the pressure got too much yesterday.
No, and I think, Andrew, I disagree with you. I think most people will see the logic of Matt accepted he'd done wrong, as you say, and he did do wrong. There's no question about that. And he accepted that, he acknowledged that, and that's why he apologised fundamentally. But we are in the middle of a very surreal situation with a pandemic, something that he has got huge experience of dealing with. It's a phenomenal success with the vaccine rollout we've seen with the team at the Department of Health. He and the Prime Minister wanted to deliver on that. That doesn't change the fact that it's quite understandable, and I think with hindsight correct, that Matt, after 24 hours, took the view that his position was distracting from that very work he wants the country focused on.
After 24 hours of bad headlines and more bad headlines to come, straightforward question, who has more control over the Cabinet? Is it the Prime Minister or the Sun?
We all serve at the pleasure of the Prime Minister. We're all focused on working with the Prime Minister.
And
We work as a team. And the reality is Matt's position, he took the view that his position was distracting from that important work. He obviously wants to put his children's thoughts in his mind as well, as he rightly should, but also thinking about the wider country and being able to deal with the pandemic. We're now, we're blessed in our party to have talent such as people like Sajid Javid, who can come in with such vast experience and be able to work with a really good team of ministers at the Department of Health now to take that work forward. And also, to be fair, Matthew, the team there, led by Matt, have had phenomenal success with the vaccine rollout, modernising the NHS, and dealing with this over
the other side of it is 128,000 people in this country have died of COVID, and we had one of the worst economic hits in the Western world. So it wasn't exactly an unalloyed or unspotted success, was it?
Look, we've all said this has been a very, very difficult period. Obviously, we'll do an assessment of that. We'll be judging that when we come to the other side of the pandemic. But that doesn't change the fact there have been big steps forward in the health service. The entire team at the Department of Health rightly should be proud of, and we should all as a country be proud of the work across government and across society in terms of the vaccine rollout.
Let's talk about the leak of those now notorious pictures. Was this a spy camera hidden in his office, or was it a CCTV camera, the results of which were leaked by somebody inside the department? Do you know what happened?
I don't know the details. I've seen probably
Will we find out what happened?
Well, I've seen, Andrew, what you and viewers will have seen this morning in some coverage in the press around what is people are saying has happened. The Department of Health will be investigating this quite rightly to understand how this was able to happen. Putting aside what's on the pictures, the fact that it was leaked at all is something they do need to investigate.
Does this not need to go beyond the Department of Health? I mean, I don't know whether your office has a camera in it, whether ministers across government are aware of how often they are being filmed and indeed recorded while they're in their private offices. Does there need to be a general review of security across Whitehall?
Well, I'm sure it's something that the team will be looking at across government. I have to say, I always take the view it's best to assume that everything you're saying or putting in writing is going to be reported somewhere, Andrew. But look, we've got to be able to make sure that we...
earlier,
well, and as I say, I think we've got to all be very clear that the focus for all of us should be on our jobs and delivering on our jobs for people, and that's why it's good we've got somebody like Sajid Javid, as I say, who can come in and take that work forward.
From what we know now, do you think the Official Secrets Secrets Act was breached?
As I say, I don't know the details yet. I've seen what your viewers and yourself will have seen in the press this morning. You know, we've got to be concerned about the fact that somebody was able to secure recording from inside a government building. We've got to do the work to understand how that happened and to be able to assess how we deal with that going forward. Absolutely.
Now, you're Northern Ireland now, but you were a security minister beforehand. This morning, the BBC is reporting that a member of the public found highly classified documents behind a bus stop in Kent, and they covered the passage of HMS Defender through Ukrainian waters, and they covered proposals for Britain's military presence in Afghanistan going forward. Very, very sensitive stuff. How serious a breach of security is this?
I think it is a serious breach, and the Ministry of Defence, I've spoken to the Defence Secretary, are taking forward an internal investigation into how this happened. Now, to an extent, processes were followed, that it was reported by the individual as soon as they were aware that they had left those documents, and obviously somebody handed it into the BBC. But there will be a full investigation by the Ministry of Defence into how this happened. And again, we've got to ensure that when things like this happen, whether it's human error or otherwise, that it can't happen again.
Let's turn back to the politics of all of this. You've talked about Sajid Javid as being an excellent Secretary of State going forward. Is he going to be the third successive Secretary of State for Health who fails to solve the social care conundrum?
No, I think the team, as I say, I think the team under Matt as well were very focused on delivering on this. The Prime Minister's focused on it. I think Sajid will be able to take
Is there an answer coming soon?
Well, as the Prime Minister has said and as the Health Department has said, we want to see a solution put before people before the end of the year. Yeah. That's still where the focus will be. And I think
what he said just after the election, is that there is a clear plan for this. We have seen neither sight nor sound of any such clear plan.
Well, I was going to say two things. I think, importantly, Sajid Javid has got a real experience and understanding of this, not just from his time at the Treasury working on this, but obviously he was Secretary of State at the Communities and Local Government Department. There's a real crossover between local authorities, as I know it, as an ex-councillor minister in that department, and health and social care. The Prime Minister, I think most people will understand, this is a hugely complicated issue. That's why it's taken time to work it through, particularly where the focus over the last year and a half or so has rightly been on dealing with the pandemic. But we've committed to coming forward with proposals before the end of the year, and I know Sajid is somebody who will be focused on making sure we deliver.
If Matt Hancock was such a successful Secretary of State, and we should be so proud in the work the department has done, why are we the only major European country who can't travel abroad for holidays?
Well, we are taking a cautious approach as we come out of the pandemic. I think that's absolutely right. As Grant Shapps himself has said, obviously we've got some ambition of what we want to do before the end of the summer to give the industry and the public a bit of a sense of where we're going, because we've always been clear. We want to give people an idea. That's what the roadmap was about what we're hoping to achieve next. But we've got to make sure we do that cautiously and properly so that when we do roll out, we can know it can be safe and we can stay there.
OK, one final question about Northern Ireland. As Northern Ireland Secretary, you tweeted this not so long ago: there is no Irish sea border. Can I just ask you straightforwardly to accept that that is not true?
Well, I've said before that I fully appreciate that tweet has not aged well, and the reality is...
Well, it's worse than that. That's when you broke the trust of a lot of people in Northern Ireland. They looked at that and they said, come on.
Well, and actually on the 1st of January, we were very clear that we were going to have no sea border. Mm-hmm. What's happened since then is that what we have seen is the implementation of the protocol, the outworkings of it, the purest way the EU want to see it, has meant that we've seen disruption in Northern Ireland that not only isn't what people foresaw, but goes against the protocol itself. That's why we need flexible solutions.
Question, is there an Irish sea border?
Well, we've got to make sure that there isn't one. At the moment,
is there one?
Andrew, at the moment, well, it depends on how you describe it. I personally would say that what we've got to make sure is that we've got good free flow of products, GB to Northern Ireland, but Northern Ireland to GB is working.
Question. Is there or is there not right now? Well,
if you travel to Northern Ireland, as I do regularly, when you go through the airports, you're not going through a border in the sense that anybody expects a border. But I'm not denying the fact there is big disruption in Northern Ireland for businesses and consumers. We need to rectify that, and we will do that.
Do you think it's kind of hands up Sunday morning? Do you think you should say hands up and apologise for that tweet to people in Northern Ireland? Well,
I've already said, as I say, that tweet has not aged well. We've got to make sure that we are delivering for people in Northern Ireland. We get the flexibility so that people in Northern Ireland have the same experience as they would anywhere else in the United Kingdom in terms of being able to receive products and goods. Now, that's a two-way thing, and the EU need to show the flexibility that they keep talking about.
All right, Brandon Lewis, thanks very much indeed for coming in today. Now, Joe Coburn has some news about Politics Live.
Join me on BBC Two tomorrow and during the rest of Wimbledon fortnight at the earlier time of 9:15 on Mondays, Tuesdays and Thursdays. We'll be at the usual time for PMQs on Wednesday. That's Politics Live on BBC Two tomorrow at 9:15.
the ineffable Joe Coburn, and this is what's coming up later this morning on BBC One.
Coming up on Sunday Morning Live.
A dramatic story of escape, compassion and survival. We'll find out why a Polish wartime social worker is being commemorated this weekend.
We'll meet the DJ turned chaplain who found God on the dance floor.
And Iceman Wim Hof joins us as we dive into his exhilarating cold water world.
Join us at 10:30.
My final guest this morning is Matt Hancock's predecessor as Health Secretary and the man tipped by many last night to regain the job. Sajid Javid was chosen instead, and so Jeremy Hunt remains chair of the Health Select Committee of MPs. Jeremy Hunt, welcome. You know more almost about the NHS than anybody currently outside it. Given that there's a new Secretary of State for Health, what is the biggest single challenge that he faces today?
Well, first of all, I think Sajid is an excellent appointment, and I think he'll do the job very well. And he's someone who says the same in private to what he says in public, and that is a very good virtue in politics. What the NHS will be thinking about right now is the enormous backlog, combined with the fact that they're going to have probably a permanent vaccination programme and prepare for the next pandemic. But they also, I hope, will take this moment to think about the longer term challenges, what we need to do now after its worst ever year to set the system up for the 21st century. I think they're really the three S's: the social care system, which if we don't do something about that, will continue to export its most vulnerable people into our hospitals, and the NHS will never get back on its feet unless we fix that. Staffing, because we have staff shortages in nearly every specialty, and we really need to overhaul the way we do our long-term planning for staff. And the final one, a longer-term one, but nonetheless very important, is safety. We know that if we had the same maternity safety rates as Sweden, 1,000 more babies would live every year. But if you look in the way that antibiotics are stopping to work, by the middle of this century, antimicrobial resistance will mean more people dying from that than from cancer.
Those are big policy problems, certainly, but they're also big funding problems. Given that Sajid Javid was the Chancellor of austerity for a long time, the Labour Party is saying he is not the right person to go to the Treasury now and get for the NHS the money that it needs.
Well, I think that Sajid understands the importance of balancing books. But when I worked with him, I was Health Secretary, he was in charge of local government. We had lots of discussions on social care, and he did understand the importance of funding to deliver the kind of decent services that people in this country want.
So we've got the funding issues. Peter Horby was talking about a bumpy tail out of the COVID pandemic and talking about the flu crisis and the huge queues in the NHS in other ways, which you've talked about as well. Is this the single biggest set of challenges that any new Secretary of State for Health has faced?
It's certainly amongst them, but it's also an opportunity. When the NHS was set up in 1948, we were bankrupt as a country. We had huge other challenges as well, bigger than the challenges we face today, and yet we found the imagination to be bold and imaginative, and that's what we need to do now. And I think if you talk to exhausted NHS staff on the front line, the one thing that they want to know is that there's going to be a solution to the staffing crisis. So if there's one thing that I think Sajid should focus on, it is how we make sure that we are training enough doctors and nurses for the future, because people understand that it takes 7 years to train a doctor and that you can't solve these problems overnight, but they do want to know there's a long-term solution in place.
A lot of people inside the NHS might be watching this and thinking, hold on a second, a lot of these troubles started when Jeremy Hunt was there, these funding issues and so forth, and the failure to answer social care, despite what the Prime Minister has been saying about it. Why will Sajid Javid be able to do it when you weren't able to do it and Matt Hancock wasn't able to do it?
Well, I did secure a £20 billion increase in the annual budget of the NHS, so I recognise that it needed more money. But on staffing, I set up 5 new medical schools, increased medical training places by a quarter, a huge increase. Not a single one of those doctors has yet reached the front line. And that's why what you need if you're going to solve this problem is a long-term approach, a discipline that makes sure we really do train enough doctors and nurses for the future.
Some people will say all of that taken into account, you didn't really prepare us for the pandemic, or the NHS didn't. Do you think that Matt Hancock did the right thing by resigning?
Well, I think he did do the right thing, but there's a family involved here as well, and I don't want to dwell on it for that reason. What I would also say is that being Health Secretary in a pandemic is the most challenging role anyone could ever have. And he did have incredible energy and resilience during the last year. He made himself constantly available for people like you to interview. So I think, we need to recognise that, but I think he did the right thing yesterday.
Let me talk about how this story came out, because it does seem very strange that there was a camera observing and recording what was going on inside the Secretary of State's office. Do you think that there now needs to be a really big Whitehall-wide review of security to ensure that ministers right across the board aren't being eavesdropped on as they're doing their jobs?
Absolutely. I mean, it's completely unacceptable from a security point of view that ministers are being filmed inside their own offices without their knowledge. And so there'll be issues that our intelligence agencies will want to look at very, very carefully. But there's also another issue, which is that ministers do need to have the ability to have frank, private conversations with their senior officials to debate things so that they can understand issues and know that those conversations will remain private if they're going to be able to go through the thought processes that enable them to make the right decisions. And so I think that will also be something on the minds of government ministers today. Judging by what you're saying, you think this probably was a breach of the Official Secrets Act, and that does suggest that perhaps the police should be involved. Possibly. We have rightly in this country, as a democracy and as an open society, protection for whistleblowers who find things out and release them in the public interest, and we don't want to undermine that. It's a very important part of how we work. But I do think we need to understand how this happened and to make sure that ministers are secure in their offices to be able to have conversations that they know aren't going to be leaked to hostile powers. Week in, week out, you have been invigilating and cross-questioning members of the government and from the health and social care side, and also senior officials. So in that spirit, let me ask you a couple of things. Do you think that Matt Hancock threw a protective ring around the care homes? There were lots of mistakes made last year. I think we are, as a select committee with the Science and Technology Select Committee, just finalising a report which is going to be our verdict, and so I don't want to prejudge that. My own view is, looking at the entirety of what happened in the last year, there were some of the worst failures of the state in our lifetime, and also some of the biggest successes of the state in our lifetime. And any dispassionate judgment is going to have to put those two very contradictory things side by side. Well, I'm quite sure you'd say that the vaccine rollout was one of the great successes, but what happened in care homes, was that one of the great failures? I think it was, and I think there was a blind spot there about the social care system, which is another reason why absolutely top of Sajid Javid's list will be to get a 10-year plan for the social care system to really set it up for the future in the way that the 10-year plan for the NHS did back in 2018. We all watched you as you were cross-questioning Dominic Cummings, and he was making those extraordinary claims about Matt Hancock, saying he lied 15 times and he should have been fired 15 times, and so on and so on. And then you said, but we haven't seen the evidence for that. As we sit here now, have you seen any evidence for those charges against Matt Hancock made by Dominic Cummings? No, but I think it's also fair to say that if you take out the sort of the personal vendettas and the score settling, Dominic Cummings said some pretty important things that helped us understand why certain wrong decisions were made at crucial moments this time last year. And so I think it was a very important evidence session. But on that particular thing, I do think the case is unproven. Do you think that Dominic Cummings is an honest broker in this? Well, he seems to have his own personal political agenda. So does everyone in the world of politics. The trick, I think, is going to be to take that out of it and actually look at the things he said about why it was that decisions at crucial moments were not made. And that's where I think what he said will be very helpful. Let me ask you about the balance of power inside government. Sajid Javid is not, like Matt Hancock, one of the big voices of caution and pro-restrictions and so forth. And it does seem, as we were discussing earlier on in the programme, that the balance of power has shifted, as it were, in Cabinet. Is this therefore a more get rid of restrictions, move on July the 5th kind of Cabinet than it was before? Well, I thought Salma Shah made a really interesting point when she said that. I think that might have been significant if it was 6 months ago. But I think the balance of opinion for everyone has now moved to learning to live with COVID, getting on with our normal lives, absent a variant that is immune to the vaccines that we have, and touch wood, we don't seem to have that at the moment. I think most people will say we've got to start getting back to normal, and I would agree with that.
We're almost out of time, but a very quick question. You had 6 years and you weren't able to solve the social care conundrum. How long does Sajid Javid have?
6 months, because the government has said they will do it by the end of this year, and I know Sajid will want to honour that promise.
Gosh, really brisk answers. Jeremy Hunt, thanks so much indeed for joining me today. Thanks indeed to all my guests, and of course to you for watching. I will be back, God willing, next Sunday. Goodbye.